What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gage. Welcome to the channel. Today, I am excited to be showing off my favorite strategy, and that is the Dark Exas Adventure Phantom Knight deck profile. And while that is quite a mouthful to say, it is a very fun strategy, one I've been fond of for quite some time. It has dope artwork, and it is just a ton of fun to play. I'm not necessarily saying this is the most optimal way to be able to play it or that it's even meta, but if you're looking for a change of pace in today's metagame, then this is the deck for you. Before I get started, I just want to say thanks to all the support I've been getting. I'm almost at 400 subscribers, which is wild to think about. So if you are fans of content like this, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to go ahead and stop yapping and hop right into it. So strap in. This is going to be quite an in-depth deck profile, especially if you aren't familiar with the cards themselves, because I am going to kind of do a bit of a breakdown as to what the cards do, as well as how the cards synergize and kind of my thought process behind the way that I've chosen to deck build. So first and foremost, I am playing 3 copies of the main man himself, which is the Phantom Knights of Torn Scales. Amazing looking card. It has the ability where on the field it could discard a card to send a Phantom Knights card from the deck to the grave, which is great as not a way to be able to get your combo started, but it also has the ability where if a Phantom Knights card in the grave is banished, while this is in the grave, you could special summon this card. It does get banished when it leaves the field, but a lot of the times that doesn't end up mattering because it's already fulfilled its purpose. So the reason that it's you want to play 3 is pretty simple. You want to maximize on the amount of starters and extenders, and this is one of the few cards in the deck that acts as both. So 3 copies is fantastic. The name of the game is really ensuring that you have the ability to get as many level 3 monsters in play so that you can get into your Cherubini as well as your Rusty Bardiche. So that is why you are going to see that we are trying to maximize on the amount of ways that we can get into these monsters, and the way that we do that is playing the best level 3s. So as far as other Phantom Knights go, we are playing 3 copies of the Phantom Knights of Silent Boots, which simply says if you control a Phantom Knights monster, special summon it from the hand, but you can also banish this from the grave to add a Phantom Knight spell or trap from the deck to your hand. So just great extender all around. Being able to get access to your spells and traps means that not only does that get you access to your Fog Blades, which acts as an additional effect negation for your opponent, but you can also use it to gain access to the rank up spell, which is how we gain access to the Dark Exas package. So I'll go into a little bit more later in the deck profile, but just know that Silent Boots is great at helping to be a bridge that the deck needs to be able to get into its ultimate combo. I am playing 2 copies of Ancient Cloak. We aren't playing 3 because of the fact that it doesn't really do too much on its own. It's more of an extender, but this has the ability where you can banish it from the grave to add a Phantom Knights card from the deck to your hand. So it doesn't special summon itself in any way. It really just acts as an extender, which is why we're not playing the 3 copies, but I have found that 2 is great for the grind game. What you're going to notice about the deck is that this isn't necessarily always going to be work out. You know, obviously your opponent is going to, hand trap you or have ways to interrupt you. And so I've designed the deck so that it is able to play in the grind game. So you do want to be able to still have ways to be able to grind. And so that's why I think that 2 is necessary, so that in turns 2, turn 3, if you do end up finding yourself in a grind, you still have Phantom Knights to be able to send to the graveyard off of your Cherubini or even your Torn Scales effect. So 2 copies has worked for me, as well as 1 copy of Ragged Gloves. It has the ability where you can banish it from the graveyard to send a Phantom Knight from the deck to the graveyard. So this is just great because you could use it to obviously send your copy of Ancient Cloak. It also gets you access to your Torn Scales, or you could use it to send your Silent Boots, and all of them have utility in the graveyard in one way, shape, or form. So essentially this acts as the bridge to help you get into the different pieces that you need. Of course, you also have the ability to send your trap as well, and sometimes that is useful because the trap does have the ability to banish itself to special summon a Phantom Knight, so sometimes you need an additional extender, and the fact that the Ragged Gloves can send one of those extenders in a pinch is amazing at being able to help keep your engine going. So I have found that it can be bricky to play too many of it, but it is a great discard outlet. It is a great extender for the deck, and I found that 1 copy is the sweet spot. And that's it for the main deck Phantom Knight monsters. Now for the supplementary engine, I am playing 3 copies of the Water Enchantress of the Temple. The point of the adventure package is the Phantom Knights themselves. Your standard combo is generally going to end on many different monster negations. Now, you may already can tell that by me saying that, that does mean that the deck is susceptible to spell and traps. And so the way that we are mitigating that is by playing the Adventure Engine, which does get you access to an Omni Negate, which is what the deck was sorely lacking. The fact that we can play the Adventure Engine means that we have access to layered interaction so that our end board is that much more resilient. We don't necessarily want to end on a board that doesn't have an Omni Negate, because then if your opponent just ends up playing like a Dark Hole or a Raigeki or something along those lines, it does mean that your board is weak to those types of removal. So the Water Enchantress is great in 2 reasons. One, if you control an adventure token, you could straight up special summon this card from the hand, which is great because it is a level 3 monster, which has synergy with our Cherubini. But of course, it does have the ability where you could banish itself from the hand or graveyard to add the Rite of Aramesir from the deck or grave to your hand. So that is fantastic because obviously it not only is an extender, but does get you access to the Adventure Engine as a whole. The Rite of Aramesir is what allows you to get the token, which allows you to get the Wandering Griffin Rider's negate online. So during the main phase, if you control no monsters or control the adventure token, you can quick effect special summon this card. But when a card or effect is activated while you control an adventure token, which you will by off of the Rite of Aramesir's effect, you can shuffle this card into the deck and negate the activation and destroy that card. So this is what allows the deck to be able to have multiple forms of layered interaction to make it more difficult for your opponent to be able to establish their board and play the game. So that is why I am choosing to play this package. And now for some additional extenders, and this is actually support from the newest ban list. We are playing 2 copies of the newly semi-limited Jackalope, as well as the newly semi-limited Danger Tsuchinoko. As soon as I saw the last ban list and saw that these cards were now semi-limited, I immediately threw them into the extra copies into the deck. If there's anything that you'll gain from this deck profile, it's the suggestion that you're more than likely going to want to pick up your 3rd copy of Tsuchinoko as well as your 3rd Jackalope, because they are fantastic additions for the Phantom Knight strategy. The fact that they are level 3s and they are dark monsters is imperative to being able to help you get into your Cherubini as well as your Rusty Bardiche. So my suggestion would be to pick up those cards, because a lot of the time the Konami's thought process is, well, we'll try putting a card to 2 copies on the semi-limited list, and if it doesn't end up doing anything, then we will consider unlimiting it and putting it at 3 copies, which means that there is a high probability that these cards will come back to 3, in which case it'll make the deck even more strong than it already is. However, for now, we're going to stick with the 2 copies as is. So all the dangers can reveal themselves, and your opponent will randomly choose a card from your hand, and then you will discard the card that they chose. If the card was not the danger, you could go ahead and special summon this from the hand and then draw 1 card. However, if this is discarded, you special summon this card. But if this is discarded, you special summon a danger from the deck, which will be the Tsuchinoko. So they just work very well in tandem with each other. The fact that it's dark means that it's very imperative that you have darks, as many darks as possible, because Rusty requires darks for its link material. So that is why I am very happy to see that these cards are at 2 copies and will be ecstatic when they do eventually come back to 3 copies. Because let's be honest, at the speed the game is at right now, 3 copies of having these cards is not going to do much at all. So I highly recommend for the Phantom Knight strategy playing these cards. And I did an iteration of this deck profile before, and I was originally playing 3 copies of the Kagi Musha Knight, and essentially those other 2 copies ended up being the extra copy of Tsuchinoko and the Jackalope. So Kagi Musha itself is still fantastic. If you normal summon, you could go ahead and special summon this card from the hand. Can't be used as synchro material, but doesn't matter because we are a Link and Exes based deck, so that is irrelevant. And it's still a dark, so a lot of the time we kind of had to play 3 copies. The thing about the level 3 monsters in this game, and the ones that we have access to, some of them are lackluster, like the Psychic Package, for example. Wielder and Tracker, they're fine level 3 extenders, but they're Earths. And that was always a detriment to the strategy, because if you do not have the Darks, you cannot continue to go into the Rusty Bardies. So I've always found that Kagi Musha was among the better level 3 extenders, but it still never really felt all that good to draw into multiples. So the one for now is just fine. It will definitely get replaced the minute that Jackalope or Tsuchinoko comes back to 3. But for now, it's fine. Worst case scenario, you can end up normal summoning one of your cards to being able to special summon the Kagemusha Knight, which gets you instant access to your Cherubini plays. So yeah, the one Kagemusha is working just fine for me for now. And then for the last extenders, so to speak, I am playing the one Barbar as well as the one Graph. So for those of you who might be familiar with the deck or Burning Abyss as a whole, you might see that Seer is not among these monsters. And I do want to just start off by saying that that is perfectly acceptable if you want to play the Seer. However, I do want to explain my reasoning for the Barbar itself. The reason I am choosing to play Barbar as one of my extenders is because of the fact that twofold. One, we are in the modern era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which requires us to have a way to be able to inflict burn damage. As I mentioned, this deck is designed to go into the grind. You are not always going to be able to, build the God board. You're going to be interrupted. So there are going to be instances in which this ends up going into a grind, and you want to have access to a card that is able to inflict burn damage in time. It is not a way that we want to be able to play, and I feel like the time rules was probably one of the worst things to happen to the game, unfortunately, but it is an era that we live in, and because of it, we do have to play the Barbar, in my opinion. Seer, as taking up this spot, is totally understandable, but the reason that I don't really miss Seer is because we weren't really doing all that much with the extra body that Cherubini gives us anyway, because a lot of the time we end up having Rusty on the field as well, and he cannot be used as link material anyway. So a lot of the time, the Cherubini just ends up sitting there and ends up just getting ran over by a weak monster anyway, because a lot of the time it's just going to have that 500 attack. So Barbar has another utility in that it has the ability to banish the Burning Abyss monsters to inflict that burn damage. So that little bit of damage can actually make it that much easier for you to be able to kill your opponent on the crackback. A lot of people might not see it that way, but there are so many times where I'm very close to being able to go for game, and I can't because I am short just a few hundred life points. And that extra life points does end up coming up from that burn damage. However, because of the fact that you are banishing these from the graveyard, it means that your opponent can then not use these against you. Most of the time, I'm referring to Cherubini. Gloomy, the Dark Charmer, is able to special summon a dark monster from your graveyard, and a lot of the times I found that my opponent is able to steal my Cherubini to use it for themselves, and even if they don't end up using it to send a level 3, they could just use it to end up climbing, link climbing even more, and I don't want them to be able to do that. By banishing them from my graveyard, I prevent my opponent from being able to use that as a play against me, which has happened many times, and I'm playing a second Cherubini just for that reason, so that if I do end up needing to banish it off of the Barbar, I do have a second one if I just so happen to need it in the grind game. So yeah, if you're not familiar, all of the Burning Abyss monsters are able to special summon themselves. However, if you control a monster that's not a Burning Abyss monster, you would destroy this card. However, it works fine in tandem with the Cherubini, because as long as you special summon this card to the zone that the Cherubini points to, the Cherubini prevents that monster from being able to be destroyed by its own card effect. So that is how you are allowed to be able to extend them. A lot of the times, if you have these cards in your hand, you can then use your Cherubini to go ahead and send your Water Enchantress, for example, to get access to your Adventure engine. But if you don't have these and you need an additional extender, you can send the Graph, which is then able to special the Barbar, and then you could go ahead and use these to go into your one copy of Rusty Bardies, which will trigger the Barbar, banishing those, inflicting 800, and going from there. So yeah, I found that these are just the ones I've wanted to play the most. The fact that Barbar has that utility for the burn damage has come up for me in many different ways, and I highly recommend giving it a try. So yeah, but if you want to play the Seer, go ahead and play the Seer. And for the non-engine, I am choosing to play 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joy Spring. Obviously, the deck, I like being able to play cards that have multiple forms of utility, and the fact that this hand trap is one of the best cards in the game at being able to interrupt your opponent, as well as being a level 3 monster, means that in a pinch you can go ahead and use it as a level 3 monster to get into Cherubini to help you get into your plays. So that is why I enjoy playing 3 copies of Ash, as well as 3 copies of Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill. This is essentially taking the place of what could be an Imperm, but I like the fact that I am playing this because, again, it is a level 3 monster that you could use to get into the Cherubini in a pinch. So 3 copies of Ghost Mourner, not necessarily the best hand trap, but it gets the job done. And then for the last non-engine, I am playing 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. The fact that this is, it almost feels like this card was made for the Phantom Knight strategy, because it is one of the best ways to be able to play if you are just so happen to lose the die roll and you're forced to go second. It can help break your opponent's board by sending cards from your hand to the graveyard, which a lot of the time is going to be your Phantom Knight's cards, and then you could use it to essentially negate your opponent's field, and now you sent a bunch of cards that have utility in the graveyard to help you combo off. Worst case, if obviously we do want to go first with the deck, so you could just end up using it as if it were an Imperm by setting it on your side of the field and using it to interrupt your opponent during their turn. I've used it as a battle trick. A lot of people forget about the Forbidden Droplet's ability to have your opponent's attack, so a lot of the times if my opponent tries to attack into my monsters, I will go ahead and just flip this in the damage step, and there's not a lot of things that your opponent can do in the damage step unless they're playing battle tricks themselves, and a lot of the times they don't see it coming, and you can actually get a cheeky win from being able to use the Droplet in a smart way. So I love Droplet. Great. I've gone back and forth about what cards to be able to play, and Droplet is just a fantastic card going first and second, so I highly recommend trying it out. And, of course, for the remaining cards for the Adventure package, I am playing the 3 Rite of Aramis here, as well as the 1 Fateful Adventure. The Rite of Aramis here is what allows you to special summon your Adventure token, which makes your Wandering Griffin Riders negate online. And then you also have the ability to place a Fateful Adventure from the deck to your Spell and Trap card zone, so your opponent cannot ash this card. However, once you get access to the Fateful Adventure, this allows you to go ahead and search for a card, or monster rather, that mentions Adventure token from the deck to your hand. So this is what allows you to get into your Wandering Griffin Rider, which allows itself to special summon once it has the token on the field to get you access to that negate. Additionally, if you already have the Wandering Griffin Rider in your hand, you could go ahead and use it to add your Water Enchantress, which will then allow you to have an additional level 3 extender. If you summon a monster, you can then add the 1 copy of Draco back from the deck to your hand, which is essentially a free discard outlet, because when you search for a monster that mentions the Adventure token, you can then go ahead and discard a card from your hand. A lot of the times you want to end up discarding something like a Phantom Knight to be able to give it utility in the graveyard, but say there are, hand traps in your hand that you don't want to discard, a lot of the times I will, before going for the search, summon a monster, gain access to the Draco back so that I can then use the Fateful to add the Wandering Griffin Rider or the Water Enchantress, and then discard the Draco back, which will then attach itself for free to the Adventure token. So there are ways to be able to play around with sequencing, and that is one of the things that you're really going to have to practice if you do choose to play the deck, is how you choose to sequence your plays, and a lot of it just comes with practice and experience. So yeah, this again, this engine is fantastic. It allows the deck to have more forms of layered interruption, which is what it was missing beforehand. It's great at setting up monster negates, but never being able to have access to an Omni Negate, and this was just essentially a blessing in disguise for the Phantom Knight strategy. The Draco back is also great at helping to break boards. The fact that as long as this is equipped to a non-effect monster, which a lot of the times it's just going to be equipped to your Adventure token anyway, you could straight up just target a card on the field, and then 1 card your opponent controls, rather, and return it to their hand, which is great. A lot of the times, if they have an extra deck monster, you target it, it goes straight back to their extra deck, and you just dealt with a threat essentially for free. So yeah, I love this engine. I will say, obviously, it's great going first. However, it isn't the greatest going second. Obviously, if your opponent sees that you're trying to activate a Rite of Aramis here, they're not just going to let you get access to an Omni Negate for free. So there's a lot of the times where it feels like a lot of this will end up being interrupted. So if you're considering, having an idea on, because there's a lot of engines in here, ideas on what to side and ideas for siding patterns. A lot of the times you may consider, depending on the matchup, actually siding out the Adventure Engine along with the Water Enchantresses and the Wandering Griffin Rider for more cards that will help you going second. So, yeah, the Adventure Engine is fantastic, and that is why I am playing these cards. For additional utility, I am playing 1 copy of Foolish Burial and Reinforcement of the Army. The fact that the reinforcement is essentially a copy of any Phantom Knight name. So if you need Torn Scales, this gets you that. If you need access to your Silent Boots, you could go ahead and grab that. Essentially, both of these cards are whatever card you need to be able to continue to combo and extending. So yeah, that's why I play the 2 copies of the 1 Reinforcement and the 1 Foolish. I'm also playing the 1 Called by the Grave, obviously just amazing at being able to stop your opponent from hand trapping you. You really, don't want to get hit specifically with cards like Shifter, because obviously this is a graveyard-based strategy, so you do not want to end up just getting, essentially having to pass your turn, right? Because if you end up getting Shifted, that means that you essentially lose access to most of your plays. However, if you don't end up having to use it to stop a hand trap, you could use it to interrupt your opponent on their turn because of the fact that it's a quick effect. So yeah, the Called by the Grave is just a solid utility card. And then the 1 rank up Phantom Knights rank up Magic Force. So this is what allows you to play the Dark Exas package. And the reason why you still play the 1 copy is because of the fact that it is searchable. You could either set it off of your Rusty's effect, or you can use it to, you could search it off of your Silent Boots. So there are different ways to be able to get to it. And of course, it's not the greatest card to draw into. It could be considered a brick. However, if you already have, say you do draw into this and you have a way to be able to get into your Rusty already using the other cards in your hand, then this just means that this is 1 less card that you have to search later down the line in the combo. You could just end up using your Silent Boots, for example, to search for another Fogblade, which will act as an additional form of interruption. So we'll talk a little bit about how to be able to utilize the Dark Exas package once I get to the extra deck. And then, of course, you can't play the Phantom Knight strategy without playing the copies of Fogblade as well as the Wing. These traps are fantastic because they are extenders, because they can banish themselves from the grave to go ahead and special summon a Phantom Knight from the graveyard. That goes for your main deck monsters, including your extra deck monsters like your Rusty Bardiche. However, the Fogblade is great in that you are able to target an effect monster on the field, negate that effect, so essentially it acts like an additional imperm. So this is amazing because of the fact that it allows your field to have layered interaction. You have monster negation, you have trap negation. If you have access to the Wandering Griffin Rider via the Adventure combo, you have an Omni negate. So a lot of the times on your best M boards, you're able to end on 4, 5 negates, maybe even more than that if you are able to get to your Requiem. So the reason that you want to play the 3 Fogblade as well as the Wing is because of the fact that they are hard once per turns when you are going to choosing to banish itself to special summon a Phantom Knight from the grave. So you do want to be able to have the ability to be able to have 2 different forms of the trap to be able to act as an additional extender. So that is why I am choosing to still play the Wing. And as far as, like I mentioned, this is designed to go into the grind game, and you do need to be able, I've considered cutting down the Fogblade, but the thing is, you do need at least a copy of the trap or the spell in the deck in order for your Rusty's effect to be able to set, to be able to send a Phantom Knight to the graveyard to resolve. If you do not have the spells or traps in the deck, you unfortunately are unable to resolve your Rusty's ability to send a Phantom Knight to the graveyard and set one of the spells and traps because you don't have one from the deck. So yeah, that is why I am still choosing to play them. Otherwise, they're just great discard outlets. If you end up discarding it off of your Torn Scales effect, if you end up discarding it off of your Fateful Adventure, if you end up discarding it off of your Danger effects, there's so many different ways to be able to get these cards into the graveyard. And I found that 4 is the sweet spot, and all of them have come up in the grind game in multiple different ways. So I would highly recommend playing the 4 copies. So that's it for the main deck. Now to go into the extra deck. As I mentioned, we are playing the Cherubini, who is the heart and soul of the deck. I'm actually choosing to play 2, and that is because it has come up in the grind game. A lot of the times you can use your Cherubini to send something on the first turn that you can then, on the second time you go into it, you can send whatever you didn't send the first time around. So just to quickly go over him, you can send a level 3 monster from the deck to the graveyard. You target a Burning Abyss monster on the field, which is 99% of the time itself, and it gains attack and defense equal to the attack and defense of the monster that was sent during that turn. So it does go back to its 500 stat once the turn ends, but it doesn't matter. The whole point is to go ahead and send a level 3 monster to the graveyard. So that is literally going to be all of your different Phantom Knights. Whatever you don't already have access to is what you are going to be able to send. However, it does also have the ability to send your Water Enchantress, which can banish itself from the graveyard to go ahead and add you your Rite of Aramesir, giving you access to your adventure package. So I play the 2 copies. That's also why I don't mind banishing the 1 copy off of the Barbar, because of the fact that I play the second. So if I needed to get into a second, I have access to it. And a lot of the times that catches my opponent off guard. It is unconventional to play 2, and I found that it's come up. So yeah, I do play the 2, and I recommend you trying it as well. As for the other extra deck monsters, I am playing the 1 Rusty Bardiche. It requires 2+ dark monsters to make, and during the main phase, you can send a Phantom Knights monster from the deck to the grave to set a Phantom Knight spell or trap directly from the deck. So that's why I was mentioning that you have to play as many of the traps as you do, because you do need them to be in the deck in order for you to resolve the Rusty Bardiche. However, it has a second effect that allows you to if a Dark Exas monster is special summoned to a zone that this card points to, you could target a card on the field and destroy it. So that is what allows you to get into your Dark Exas package, because a lot of the times going first, it allows you to send something like your Breaksword, which when this is destroyed by a card, allows you to special summon Phantom Knights from the graveyard with different names, and special summon them essentially as level 4 monsters now, because it increases the level by 1, which allows you to get into the Dark Exas package, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about Breaksword himself, which I am playing 2 copies of. Once per turn, you could detach a material from this card, target a card you control and one your opponent controls, and destroy them. So it's just great at being able to break boards. But then it has that secondary effect where if this is destroyed, either by its own card effect or if you special summon it to a zone that Rusty points to, then you have the ability to go ahead and special summon your Phantom Knights from the grave with different names and increase their levels. So these will be level 4s, which is imperative for getting you into your Dark Rebellion, getting you access to the Dark Exas package. So I play 2 copies. I feel like that's been the sweet spot. I have considered playing 3. It has come up in some instances, but I do feel like 2 is enough. And now for the Dark Exas package that I've been alluding to this entire time, we are playing the 1 Dark Rebellion Exas Dragon, 1 Dark Requiem, and 1 Arc Rebellion. So this is the reason why we are playing the spell card, because of just how powerful having access to these monsters can be. A lot of the times what you'll do is once you destroy your Breaksword, you'll go ahead and special summon your 2 monsters. It could be, as long as they're different names, it'll be, whatever's in your graveyard at the moment. And then you will go ahead and essentially use them to go into your Dark Rebellion, which normally does not do anything on your turn. However, if you already searched your spell or you hard drew it, then you could go ahead and set it, and during your opponent's main phase, you can use it to then rank up into your Dark Requiem Exas Dragon, which once this hits the field, it puts an immense amount of pressure on your opponent because it is just an insane card. The Dark Requiem Exas Dragon, it only works if you have the Dark Rebellion Exas Dragon underneath it, which is why we have to go into it in such a roundabout way, but you are rewarded in stride once you do get into it, because it says when your opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you can detach 1 material from this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card, and you could special summon an Exas monster from the graveyard. This is insane because of 2 reasons. 1, it is not once per turn or once per chain. So you can theoretically negate and destroy 3 of your opponent's monsters, which 99% of the time is going to be GG. You usually want to detach your Phantom Knights because obviously you can use them for utility later on in the game if it does just so happen to get into the grind game, which can happen. And leaving the Dark Rebellion last so that you can continue to have access to its ability to negate. But this is the reason why I play this package, because it is just so free to be able to get into, assuming you don't end up getting interrupted somewhere in your combo. And then the Arc Rebellion is fantastic for if you're going second, because of the fact that it can't be destroyed by card effects, but you could detach a material and then it gains the attack of the total original attack of all monsters on the field. And if it has a Dark Exas monster as material, which it will, you can negate the effects of all other face-up monsters on the field. You can't declare attacks except for itself when that happens, but you usually have so much attack that you could just straight up OTK your opponent with Arc Rebellion. So I love this package. It's just so much fun. Yes, you do have to get a little bit of work to get into it, but it is just very easy to get into it because of the many different ways you can search for your spell card for the rank up spell. So I highly recommend trying it out. It increases the ceiling of the deck tremendously. And of course, it wouldn't be an Exas deck if you weren't playing Downerd and Zeus. The fact that you could just, if you're an Exas monster declared an attack, like your Breaksword, for example, usually you'll end up, having two of your Phantom Knights underneath it. You could then, assuming that this card battled, you could go ahead and go into your Downerd Magician and then go into your Zeus, which if your opponent lets you get to this point, they're losing their field because now you have two Zeus activations at your disposal, because you could go ahead and just detach two. If your opponent has a response to you using the Zeus the first time, then you could just go ahead and detach the remaining two to ensure that you are sending all cards your opponent on the field, aside from itself, to the graveyard, which is just insane to have at your disposal. There have been so many times where I go second, I droplet my opponent's field, I get into my my Breaksword, I go straight to the battle phase, and my opponent knows exactly what's going to happen after that. So you do have to play it, this package, just because it's an Exas deck. So there are going to be ways that you are going to be able to break the board, and Zeus is just one of the best ways of doing so. I'm also playing one copy of Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss. They may seem random because of the fact that we're not really playing a BA-focused strategy. However, there are times where if I am trying to get into a Zeus, I am just short of the attack to be able to do so. I found that a lot of monsters are just very beefy nowadays. So the fact that you could detach a material to send 3 cards from from your deck to the graveyard, allowing it to get to 2,500 attack, is the sweet spot needed to be able to attack into your opponent's monsters to be able to then go into your Downerd and Zeus. I know it seems random, but there are too many times where, unfortunately, my Breaksword with 2,000 attack isn't enough to be able to attack into my monsters to ensure that I can get an Exas monster that battled this turn. Not to mention the added utility of fueling your grave with potential traps or Phantom Knights is just too valuable to pass up. I am playing the one Raiders Knight, which essentially is another way of being able to rank up into your Arc Rebellion, because you could detach a material and then essentially just go ahead and rank up into your Arc Rebellion. You unfortunately can't use it to get into your Dark Requiem, because then that means you won't have the Dark Rebellion underneath, and it does require the Dark Rebellion underneath it in order to get access to the negate, so that's not really worth it. Raiders Knight is more so utility for going second. And then the one Evil Swarm Nightmare. This is essentially so that if you are unable to get into access to your spell, you don't necessarily want to go into your Dark Rebellion off of the 2 monsters that are now level 4. So this essentially gives you an alternate monster to go into that acts as an interruption for your opponent, and it's pretty solid. When your opponent special summons a monster, and that is not once per turn, you could detach an Exas material from this card to change it to that special summon monster to face down defense position. So this layer on top of other cards that you'll have at your disposal can sometimes be enough at stopping your opponent. And then I'm also playing one copy of IP and SP. We're playing so many monsters that you are a lot of the times going to have a lot of material to work with, and these are just generic dark monsters that you can go into to help either set up additional layered interaction on your field with the IP, or help break your opponent's field with the SP. And so I'll quickly go over the side deck as well, just in case you were interested. I go for a board breaker approach. I'm playing 2 copies of Lightning Storm and Feather Duster, just so I have access to interruption if my opponent is playing a lot of spells and trap cards. In the modern metagame, I found that a lot of decks nowadays do have a lot of cards that are in the spell and trap card zone, a lot of field spells that you want to get rid of, so these are just great at breaking boards. Evenly matched, I don't know how we've gotten to the point where people think that this card is just okay to have in the game, but it exists. And the fact that as long as you don't control any cards, you could straight up go to the battle phase, end it. And if your opponent does not have access to an Omni negate, or a spell and trap card negate rather, they're just going to go ahead and banish most of their field, which is just insane. So this paired up with the Lightning Storm, for example, means that even if they do have one interaction to be able to stop the Lightning Storm, well, you're going to evenly them for their life savings. So just go ahead and play 3 of those. And then for other level 3s, I am playing 3 Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, as well as 3 copies of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. Added utility, level 3s, you get the idea at this point. And I am playing 3 copies of Droll just because it's a very strong side deck card. As I mentioned, I will usually just side out either hand traps that are not relevant in the matchup when going second, or I will side out the adventure package to go ahead and side into the matchup. And that's why this deck really greatly rewards your understanding of the metagame, because if you know how to be able to play against your opponent's strategies, and you know the cards that are strong at being able to stop them, then you could side into these blowout cards that can help give you an advantage, essentially to help you break into boards. And I think nowadays more than ever, aside from being able to go first and having consistency and setting up a strong board, you have to be able to play into a board going second, because you're not always going to win the die roll. So guys, that is enough for me. If you are still around up until this point, you are an absolute real one. I really hope that you found value in my discussion of this strategy. This is a deck that I have been playing for a very long time, as you might be able to tell from the different things that I've discussed up until this point. I found it a lot of fun, and I am interested to know if there are people who have tried this deck in the past. How are ways that you have chosen to play this strategy? Have you tried being able to mix the different engines that I have tried playing together? How has it worked for you? And what are some suggestions that you have for other people who might be interested in building variations of this deck? That is essentially it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider commenting, and subscribing if you are fans of content like this. I do Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profiles, Pokemon deck profiles, Digimon, One Piece, you name it. I'm going to try and post as many new deck profiles in the new year. That is definitely my goal, to continue to make content like this. Until next time, GG.